from Abuja.
Hello, thank you for being a part of our show. We appreciate you. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and this is Magnus Kpakol GVA. As always, it's all about how we can raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. In view today, a continuation of our discussion on whether China is the real economic doctor for Africa. If you're an African, never mind that there is an ongoing trade war between China and the United States. The issue of primary importance to Africa, even in that connection, is China-Africa relations. Should Africa fear a possible new economic colonial master, or is China the real economic doctor? As we discussed last time, Beijing called for a forum on Africa and China cooperation, popularly called FOCAC, and practically every African leader jumped. And so today, we continue our discussion with David Malinga of Bloomberg to see what China and Africa are to gain from this new hot relationship. But before this, in our hidden economics, we look at what butterflies and Africa have in common. Now, up next in our quick view, we rank regions by population. That's coming right up. Africa, the second largest continent in the world behind Asia, now has a population of about 1.2 billion people and growing at about 2.6% per year, the fastest continental growth rate in the world. Asia has a population of about 4.4 billion people and growing at about 1.04%. In this connection, after Africa, which of the following continents has the second fastest population growth rate in the world? Australia, Europe, North America, and South America. Which of the following African regions has the fastest population growth rate? Eastern Africa, Northern Africa, Southern Africa, and Western Africa. Stay with us for our answers coming up shortly. Still in view, a continuation of our discussion with David Malinga of Bloomberg on the recent forum on China and Africa cooperation. Don't go away.
Never seen a type, or must be from the overseas. Overseas. Something like a butterfly. You're my butterfly. Don't fly away, butterfly. Where you dey go, butterfly? Would you be my butterfly? Sissy butterfly. Ajay butterfly. Figure 80 butterfly. My African butterfly. Come here, baby, come closer. Tell me, baby, tell me how far. Oh, yeah, yeah. Don't you keep me waiting, for your love, I'm waiting.
Butterfly, a very beautiful song by Korede Bello, a Nigerian singer and songwriter, signed to one of the biggest record labels in Nigeria, and known for his hit single, God Win, a semi-gospel and pop song which almost became a national anthem and topped many music charts across Nigeria. You are my butterfly, don't fly away. Butterfly. Now truly, some butterflies can really be very beautiful And so this butterfly, you are one of a kind. And I've never seen your type before. Ooh, you must be from overseas. Could this be what the Chinese see in Africa? I am sure that to China, Africa is a butterfly. As we know, a butterfly is so harmless, so innocent, and so lovely. Now listen to this. Butterflies and moths are the second most abundant species of insects in the world, after the beetles. Well, you know what? Africa is the second largest continent in the world in population. Africa represents about 16.4% of the world's population, with Asia accounting for about 60% of the world's population of about 7.6 billion people. Now listen to this again. Butterflies exist on all continents except Antarctica. I'm almost pretty sure that with the way black folks avoid cold climates, there's probably not a single black person in Antarctica. So don't blame the butterflies. I'm telling you, Africans are like butterflies. And then there's more. Generally, butterflies are known to be the most beautiful insects in the world. Artists, designers, poets, and songwriters have been using butterflies as subjects and inspirations in their work, just exactly as they have been using Africa and African dancers and performers in their work as well. Economically speaking, butterflies are important pollinators to most agricultural crops. And butterflies also could be a source of food to predators like birds, spiders, lizards, and other animals. That worries me though. Finally, butterflies are often portrayed as symbols of souls, freedom, love, and peace. Probably not just the Chinese, but perhaps the whole world is thinking this way. Butterfly, our hidden economics for you.
I never seen your type, oh, must be a brand new species. Butterfly, one of a kind. Never seen your type, oh, must be from the overseas. Something like a butterfly. You're my butterfly, don't fly away, butterfly. Where you go, butterfly? Would you be my butterfly? See butterfly, butterfly.
Before we start our discussion, here are our quick view answers. With a score of about 1.5%, Australia as a continent has the second fastest population growth rate in the world, to follow Africa with a score of 2.6%. Eastern Africa has the fastest growth rate of all the African regions listed here at about 2.9%, well above the African average of about 2.6%. For comments, adverts, and sponsorship, please see our information displayed on the screen. As we said last time, the recent FOCAC provided an opportunity for African leaders to meet China's leader, Xi Jinping, certainly one of the top 2 among world leaders today. China promised debt forgiveness for the poorest African countries and offered $60 billion in a new round of support in grants, loans, development aid, import financing, and direct investment. And so we continue our discussion from last time with David Malinga. David Malinga Doya is a journalist focused on the economy and government in Africa. He leads Bloomberg's economic coverage in Nigeria. He has advanced degrees in communication and management. Please join us in our continued discussion with David Malinga. To China, is Africa seen as one country? Or is it seen as regions? Or is it seen as 53, 54 countries? How are they looking when they're trading with Africa? Do they say, I'm trading with Africa as though it's one country? Or do they say, we're trading with Africa, doing investments in Africa as though it's regions? Like they have markets, regional markets? Or are they looking at individual African countries on a case-by-case basis?
I think
in that case, can they play one country against the other?
I don't know about playing one country against the other, but I think they're definitely looking at African countries rather than looking at it as you can't paint a brush, and I don't think they're painting a brush.
Okay.
Their Belt and Road project started with just a few countries, and those were the coastal countries. That's Kenya, Tanzania, Djibouti, where, by the way, they'll now have a military base, and then inside Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And the kind of infrastructure they brought to those was, ports.
Yeah.
They're finding a railway between Mombasa and Nairobi, and that is extending to Naivasha, and it will be extending to the border with Uganda and ultimately to Kigali.
Yeah.
In Ethiopia, they have, I hope, developed some factories in, textile factories. And that has been, good for that government with a lot of labor and workforce that is that needs to be employed. So I don't think they're painting a brush. And in the extended countries like Uganda, Rwanda, you see them doing different things.
Yeah.
For instance, in Uganda, they're into power. They're funding that. Besides the railway that they're doing with Kenya. So I don't think they're painting a brush per se. With other countries like Angola, they used to, the regional interest was because of the resource.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say they're painting a brush.
Okay. So if I look at the...
But having said that,
Yes.
sorry, Magnus, but having said that,
Yeah.
I think Africa on its part, and these are not just my thoughts, but many observers have said them, and even the African leaders like Paul Kagame, who is the chairman of the AU, have to really be more strategic in their thinking with what they want from this relationship with China. And, them presenting the framework of the AU is one thing. We hope that can organize the voice to be more, to really understand what they want from the table as they speak to China.
Because the reason I asked that also is that in dealing with Europe, especially, I noticed that Africans were looking at not trading one by one with Europe, but going to Europe as a united force so that they will be able to get what they want collectively. When I said, having one country played against the other, it was in that context. So if Africa is going to China on a country by country basis, then what's the FOCAC for then? What's the Central African theme? What's the thing that Africa wants if they are not speaking as one voice when they go there?
I think speaking as one voice is a work in progress.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, development is going to come to individual countries.
Yeah.
If they're building a road or a port, it's going to come to it. Creating linkages is understood, but at the end of the day, all countries have their own processes, have their own ways of doing things, and this development will happen in those countries. But the issue of speaking with one voice, which ultimately will lead to one market and one bargaining voice, is a work in progress.
Okay.
As you may know, there are many countries that signed onto the Continental Trade Agreement.
Yeah.
I think it's still a long, long way to go, but it's a step.
Yeah.
I think in the right direction. And the things that they're talking about that will ultimately bring linkages among the African countries themselves, I think are meaningful.
Did you notice that just on the eve of the meeting, Theresa May toured Africa, Angela Merkel toured Africa. Of course, before then, just a little bit, Macron came to Africa. Was it because they had seen the calendar and they knew that Kpakol was coming, and they needed to talk to the African leaders before they went to Beijing. Do you think that that's why they came about at the same time?
I think Africa is definitely in the spotlight.
Yeah.
May come because she wants to make friends. The UK is on the verge of leaving Europe. There's a lot of uncertainty, and they will want to do bilateral agreements.
Yeah.
Because currently it's Africa and EU, and of course some bilaterals, but it's really Africa. So when they get out, they'll need to do bilaterals. So they have to strengthen where they have strength,
Yeah.
and then they have to look for new opportunities where they ain't.
Yeah.
And Marco did not just come to say hello to President Buhari. She also has her own battles to fight for Germany and Europe in the context of what's happening in the world. You have seen a lot of friction between Germany and the US, with the America First policy of President Trump. Even if he says America First does not mean America alone. But all that really requires these countries to spread out.
Yeah.
And China has been here for a long time in Africa too. It's time for it to also kind of get new friends and strengthen the friendships that are there, because it will need these friendships. As for Africa, again, the message is from some of the leaders that spoke at the FOCAC, their work is cut out.
Yeah.
They need to understand what they want from the whole new world order that is getting reshaped at the moment, and that is going into a direction of probably a multipolar world order.
So the Europeans, do they see themselves in competition now with China? Do you think that there is a chance, there's an opportunity for Africa to start to demand less stringent conditionalities from European institutions? Because if you don't give it to us, we're going to go to China. You see, we are getting 60 billion here.
I think the relationship between Africa and the Europeans and the US will stay.
Okay.
And the institutions of the IMF and the World Bank, in the framework with which they work, has certain advantages to African governments. And that is because, of course, there are very many governments that are either young or in transition or still sorting out a couple of things. And they need support. And we've seen that some of these institutions actually help. We have not only seen it in Africa, we have seen it in Europe, in Greece, in Portugal, and they have the advantages. So for much of the advantages the Africans can get from the Bretton Woods institutions, I think they will still continue to look for those. But there are also merits that they look for from China, which they have not been getting from Europe and the US. Yeah. And I think they should look for those. Yeah. So I think it's good to have choices.
Yeah.
But Africa's work is still cut out. They need to know what they want, and they need to speak strongly about it.
Yeah. Is this a new economic colonialism?
I have heard that. I don't know if it's a new economic colonialism.
Yeah.
But what I hear from African governments when you talk to them is that, yes, we get this money and then we put it in real things, and that helps us, develop. But they're also mindful of some of the accusations on China that come from the West. Trump talking about property rights and things like that. So I think people are kind of awake. But, like the leaders are saying again in Africa, they still need to think more strategically about what they want from this relationship. Otherwise, it will be sad if you wake up 50 years from now and nothing has happened.
Yeah. Well, what happens at the United Nations when the Chinese want supporters on some very important position where maybe they are in opposition to the United States and they're looking to, hey, I just gave you 60 billion last week and I got $170 billion trade with you. The Americans only have 55 billion. Who do you side with here? What do you do?
I think that would be a complicated conversation because, it's not like Africans are moving from the West to East.
Yes.
They are still taking on, they are still in technical cooperation and still have financial exposure with the West. So I think that will be a very difficult conversation to have on who supports who.
David, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
You're wonderful. Let's do this again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. As it is all too well known, since 2009, China has become Africa's largest trading partner. In 2017, China-Africa trade hit $170 billion, while US-Africa trade was just about $55 billion. And as we also said last time, China has been busy giving billions of dollars in loans to African governments, mostly to pay for infrastructure projects, although mostly built by the Chinese themselves. Because of the fear that the debt burden on Africa may be rising, some have been arguing that China may be using an underhanded method to seize Africa. Indeed, the social media has been full of stories that Zambia has practically become a colony of China because the country was unable to service its Chinese loans. It has been mentioned by some that China now controls about 60% of the Zambian Broadcasting Corporation. There's also the argument that Zambia may be losing some of its control over its airport and power companies. However, Zambian President Edgar Lungu has described as misleading and reckless propaganda these recent reports that China was set to seize national assets over loan payment defaults. In a speech at the opening of Parliament recently, President Lungu stressed that Lusaka's dealings with Beijing was mutual and not on the level of master and slave. As he said, and I quote, "Our friendship with China is mutual, and no amount of reckless propaganda will deter us from entrenching this relationship for the common good of our people." End of quote. We all hope so. David Malinga has also insisted that Africa has to be strategic in its relations. Africa truly is a beautiful butterfly. Everybody is coming, and hopefully not as predators, but for mutual gain. And as I've always said, Africa should insist that China refines 50% here on the continent every natural resource it mines. Trade with China is good. Simple. Africa just has to ensure it gains from it today and tomorrow. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and that's my view.